The evening had settled over the quiet suburban neighborhood with a calmness that felt almost unnatural. The air outside was crisp, the last hints of autumn clinging to the breeze before winter's chill would take over. Inside the small, warm house, Margaret moved from the kitchen to the living room, her hands still damp from washing the last dish. The smell of roasted chicken and baked potatoes lingered faintly, proof of the dinner she had carefully prepared earlier. The table was already cleared, and her younger children had scattered, some to their rooms, others to the backyard. Only Andrew, her eldest son, had stayed behind. Margaret noticed him sitting on the couch, unusually still. At 25, Andrew had grown into a strong and thoughtful man. But he carried with him a quiet energy, the kind that spoke louder than words. Normally, after dinner, he would either retreat to his room with a book or head out with friends. Yet tonight he remained. His posture was composed, but his eyes followed her with an intensity that made her pause. Something was different. Something was heavy in the air. Margaret walked to the coffee table, collecting a few stray glasses left from dinner, though her focus was entirely on her son. His gaze wasn't casual. It carried weight, the kind of look that said he had been thinking about something for too long. She tried to ignore it at first, pretending to busy herself with chores. But her heart began to beat faster. Sensing the shift, she sat the glasses in the sink and reached for a towel to dry her hands. But the unease grew inside her. There were moments in life when silence said more than words ever could, and this was one of them. She turned to him, her expression soft. "Andrew, is everything okay?" His lips parted slightly, but no words came. He seemed to hesitate, as if rehearsing the beginning of a sentence in his mind. Then, after what felt like an eternity, his voice broke the silence. "Mom, can you sit down for a minute?" The way he said it sent a chill through her. It wasn't a casual request. It was deliberate, careful, almost fragile. Margaret placed the towel down slowly, her hands brushing against the counter to steady herself before she crossed the room and lowered herself onto the couch beside him. The leather creaked under her weight, and for a moment, the hum of the old television in the background was the only sound. Andrew leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together. He stared at the floor, his jaw tight, as though he were gathering strength. Margaret watched him, her heart aching with worry. It had been years since she had seen him like this, hesitant, uncertain, carrying something too heavy for his own shoulders. Her memories drifted back to when he was a boy, no more than 8 years old, standing in the doorway of her room after his father had left. He had been so small then, his voice shaking as he asked if everything would be all right. She had lied, smiling through tears, telling him yes, everything would be fine. That memory pierced her now, because the same uncertainty she once saw in her little boy's eyes was mirrored in the man sitting beside her. Margaret leaned slightly closer. Her voice, though steady, carried warmth. "Andrew, whatever it is, you can tell me. You know that?" He inhaled slowly, his chest rising with the weight of unspoken words. For a long moment, he didn't respond, and Margaret thought he might change his mind and retreat into silence. But then, with a tremor in his hand, he reached out. His fingers brushed against hers, and in a quiet, almost hesitant motion, he took her hand into his dot. The touch was simple, but it sent a wave of emotion rushing through her. It wasn't just the physical contact, it was the message behind it. Her son wasn't a boy anymore. He was grown, independent, with a life of his own, yet here he was, holding her hand with the same fragile need she remembered from years ago. Margaret's throat tightened. She searched his face, noticing the small details that only a mother could, how his brows furrowed when he was deep in thought, how his lips pressed together when he fought back emotions. His hand trembled slightly in hers, and she tightened her grip, silently assuring him she was there, ready to listen, ready to carry whatever burden he was about to share. Andrew finally looked up at her. His eyes, blue like the ocean on a stormy day, carried emotions too layered to define sadness, love, gratitude, and something unspoken that made Margaret's chest ache. He tried to speak, stopped, and then tried again. "I don't know where to begin," he admitted, his voice thick, Margaret gave him a small, encouraging nod. "Start wherever you need to. I'll understand." For a moment, the room seemed to shrink around them, the world outside fading away. The ticking of the clock on the wall grew louder. The television's hum blurred into background noise. And all that remained was the quiet connection between a mother and her son. Andrew squeezed her hand again, not yet ready to reveal what was on his heart. But unwilling to let go either, Margaret studied him closely. And her thoughts wandered to the years that had passed so quickly. She remembered the scraped knees, the late nights helping him with homework, the countless mornings making breakfast before school. She remembered how proud she had been watching him graduate, standing tall in his cap and gown, ready to step into the world. And now, she sat beside that same boy, no longer a child, but still her child, feeling that something important was about to be spoken. Her pulse quickened as she realized that whatever Andrew was holding inside wasn't simple. It wasn't the kind of small talk they usually shared after dinner. No, this was different. This was the kind of conversation that changed the air around it. That left marks in the heart long after the words were spoken. Margaret's eyes softened. She brushed her thumb gently against his hand, silently urging him to go on. "Andrew," she whispered, "you don't have to be afraid. Whatever it is, I want to hear it." He gave a faint nod, his lips pressing into a thin line before parting again. His voice was quiet but steady this time. "Mom, I've been meaning to tell you something for a long time, but I never knew how. Tonight, I think I have too." Margaret's breath caught. Her heart pounded in her chest as she waited, the tension stretching each second into eternity. She could feel the gravity in his tone, the weight behind every syllable. This was not going to be small, not something she could dismiss with a smile and a hug. And just as he took a deep breath, preparing to speak, Margaret felt a shiver run down her spine. Whatever was about to come next would not be forgotten. The moment Andrew said he had something important to tell her, Margaret's entire world seemed to stop. She leaned closer, her hand still clasped in his, her eyes locked on his face. His expression was tense, almost pained, like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. Margaret's heart raced. She tried to stay calm, but inside she was unraveling. Her mind rushed through possibilities. Was he sick? Was he in trouble? Did he carry a secret he had been hiding for years? The silence between them grew heavier, almost unbearable. As she waited for him to continue, Andrew finally exhaled, his shoulders dropping slightly as though the weight of his own thoughts had been crushing him. "Mom," he began softly, "you've always been the one person I could count on. The one person who never let me down. I should have told you this before, but I didn't know how." Margaret's chest tightened. The tenderness in his words cut straight into her heart. She gave his hand a reassuring squeeze, silently urging him forward. "I've been carrying something inside me for a long time," Andrew said, his eyes glistening as he looked at her. "And I kept it to myself because I didn't want to disappoint you. But holding it in has only made me feel more distant, like there's a part of me you don't know." Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. She shook her head gently, her voice low but firm. "Andrew, there's nothing you could say that would make me love you less. Nothing." He swallowed hard and his grip on her hand grew tighter. "I know that, Mom, but still, I was afraid. You've given me so much, your time, your strength, your love. I didn't want to bring you any pain. But tonight, sitting here after dinner, I realized I can't keep this inside anymore." Margaret's breath came shallow. Her heart begged for him to finally release whatever was pressing on his chest. She braced herself, ready for anything, yet terrified of what might come. Then, Andrew's voice broke slightly as he whispered, "I've always wanted to make you proud, and I still do. But sometimes I feel like I'm living two lives, the one everyone sees and the one I hide." Margaret's brows furrowed, her concern deepening. She leaned in, searching his face, her own heart aching with the rawness of his words. "Andrew, tell me what you mean." He paused, his lips trembling as though each word cost him a piece of himself. Finally he said, "I'm not the man people think I am. I've struggled with who I am, with what I want, with what's expected of me. And I kept pretending everything was fine, but inside I felt like I was breaking. Margaret's hand instinctively cupped his cheek, her thumb brushing against his skin. She whispered, "Oh, Andrew." Her voice carried no judgment. Kay, only love and sorrow for the pain he had endured alone. Andrew's eyes closed briefly, as if her touch gave him courage. When he opened them again, they shimmered with emotion. "Mom, you've always taught me to be honest, to live truthfully. But I've been hiding, and I can't anymore. I need you to know the real me." Margaret's pulse thundered in her ears. She nodded slowly, encouraging him with her silence, giving him the space to continue. "I've doubted myself for so long," Andrew confessed, his words rushing now as though a dam had finally broken. "I felt trapped between being who people expect me to be and being who I really am. And I hated the idea of letting you down. You've sacrificed everything for me, for us. How could I risk breaking your heart with the truth?" Tears slipped down Margaret's face before she even realized she was crying. Her son's pain was raw, unfiltered, and it pierced her. She shook her head, her voice trembling but strong. "You could never break my heart by being honest. The only thing that hurts me is knowing you've been carrying this alone." Andrew's lips quivered. And for the first time in years, Margaret saw a vulnerability in him that reminded her of the little boy he once was. He leaned into her hand, his eyes shimmering with unspoken words. "Then let me say it," he whispered. "Let me finally be free." Margaret's tears flowed harder, but she nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Andrew, say it. I'm here." The room felt sacred, wrapped in silence, as though even the walls leaned in to hear the words about to be spoken. Andrew took a shaky breath, his hand trembling in hers. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking with the weight of years unspoken, "I've always been afraid of being judged, of being misunderstood. But the truth is, I'm not who everyone thinks I am. I've been living behind a mask, but I can't anymore. I want to be true to myself. I need to be." Margaret's heart swelled with both pain and pride. Pain for the years her son had hidden in fear. Pride for the courage he showed now in revealing himself. She didn't need every detail in that moment. His confession wasn't about labels or explanations. It was about honesty, about trust, about the unbreakable bond between them. She squeezed his hand tighter, pulling him closer until his head rested against her shoulder. "Andrew," she whispered, her tears wetting his hair, "you are my son, and I will always love you. Nothing you say could change that. Nothing." For the first time that night, Andrew let out a shaky laugh through his tears, as though relief had finally broken through the years of fear. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly, as if clinging to the one anchor he had always known his mother's love. The moment was fragile, yet powerful. A silent vow exchanged between them. Margaret knew the road ahead might not be easy. There would be questions, challenges, perhaps even struggles they couldn't yet imagine. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was this: her son had chosen to trust her, to open his heart, to share the truth he had hidden for so long. As they sat together in the quiet living room, the clock ticking steadily in the background, Margaret realized she would indeed never forget this night. Not because of the shock of her son's words, but because of the courage it took for him to speak them, and the deeper love that bloomed between them in their aftermath. She pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead and whispered, "Thank you for telling me. Thank you for trusting me. We'll face everything together, Andrew, always." And though Andrew didn't say anything more, the way he clung to her hand said everything she needed to hear. The night carried a strange stillness after Andrew's confession, like the world had shifted ever so slightly. Margaret held him close, her hand resting on his back as if she could shield him from every storm that had ever battered his spirit. She could still hear the tremble in his voice, the weight in his words. But more than that, she could feel the relief pulsing from him, the way his shoulders had finally dropped, as though he had been carrying a boulder all his life and had just set it down. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, which healing. Margaret could sense that Andrew wasn't quite finished, that there was more beneath the surface, but she didn't push. She had learned over the years that sometimes the best way to help someone open up was to simply sit with them, quietly reminding them they were safe. Eventually, Andrew pulled back slightly, wiping his eyes with the back of his sleeve. His face was flushed, his eyes red, but there was a softness in him now that Margaret hadn't seen in years. "Mom, he said hoarsely, "I thought you'd be disappointed. I thought you'd look at me differently after this. But instead, you just held me." Margaret's lips trembled into a sad smile. "That's because you're my son. I don't see labels. I don't see mistakes. I see you, the boy I raised, the man you're becoming. And nothing you said tonight could erase that." Andrew's throat bobbed as he tried to swallow back his emotions. "You don't know how much I needed to hear that." She brushed his hair back gently, the way she used to when he was a little boy. "I think I do. I think you've been carrying this loneliness for a long time, and I'm so sorry you felt you had to carry it alone." Andrew looked down at his hands, his fingers fidgeting nervously. "I did it to protect you, to protect us. I thought maybe if I kept it hidden, life would stay simple. But it didn't. It just made me feel like I was lying to everyone, especially you." Margaret's heart ached at his words. She had always thought she knew her son better than anyone, that no secret could live between them. But now she realized the quiet distance she had sometimes sensed over the years wasn't about growing up or moving out. It was about fear. Fear of honesty. Fear of rejection. Fear of being misunderstood. "You've never lied to me," she said firmly, her voice steady. "You were just waiting for the right moment to speak. And tonight was that moment. That's not weakness, Andrew. That's courage." His eyes welled again, and for a second he looked like the little boy who used to tug at her hand, asking if she thought he was brave enough to climb the tall slide at the playground. She had told him then that bravery wasn't about never being afraid, it was about moving forward even when you were. And here he was, years later, living that truth. "Do you really think I was brave?" he asked softly, almost like he was afraid to believe it. "I know you were," she whispered, "because the hardest truths are the ones we fear will hurt the people we love most. And you trusted me with yours." Something in Andrew broke open at those words. He let out a shaky laugh, part relief, part disbelief. "You make it sound so simple, Mom, but I thought this would ruin everything." Margaret shook her head, her grip on his hand firm. "The only thing that ruins relationships is silence. You spoke. You trusted. And now we can grow closer, not further apart." Andrew leaned back on the couch, exhaling as though he had run a long race and finally reached the finish line. His shoulders sagged, but not in defeat and release. "You don't know how long I've rehearsed this moment in my head. 1,000 times, maybe more. And every time I imagined the worst. But now I feel lighter, like I can breathe for the first time." Margaret felt her tears start again, but this time they weren't only for his pain, they were for his freedom. That's what truth does. It sets you free. Andrew turned to her with a small, crooked smile. "You always say that. I guess I never really understood until now." She chuckled softly, brushing her tears away. "Well, mothers repeat themselves for a reason. Sometimes it takes a while for the words to land." Their laughter mingled with their tears, and for a moment the heaviness lifted. Margaret saw her son not just as the boy she had raised, but as a man stepping into his own truth. And in that truth, he wasn't weaker. He was stronger. After a pause, Andrew's voice grew thoughtful. "I'm scared about what comes next. About what other people will think. About how the world will treat me once I stop hiding." Margaret's heart clenched because she knew his fears weren't unfounded. The world could be harsh. People could be unkind. But she also knew something deeper. Love was stronger than fear. She took his hand again, squeezing it with quiet determination. "Then let's face it together. You don't have to walk this road alone. I'll be right beside you, no matter what." His eyes softened, gratitude shining through. "Do you really mean that?" "With all my heart," she said. "I was there when you took your first steps, Andrew. And I'll be here as you take these ones too, always." The words seemed to steady him. For the first time in years, Margaret saw a glimmer of peace in his expression. He nodded slowly, as though her promise had given him a shield he hadn't known he needed. They sat like that for a long while, hand in hand, mother and son, bound by a love that had weathered storms and would weather many more. Outside, the night was quiet, the stars hidden behind clouds. But inside, something had shifted. A new beginning had taken root, and Margaret knew, deep in her heart, that whatever challenges lay ahead, they had already won the hardest battle, the battle of honesty, trust, and unconditional love. When Andrew finally stood to leave, his face carried something Margaret hadn't seen in a long time: hope. And as she watched him go, she realized she would carry this moment with her forever, etched into her soul as one of the most important nights of her life. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, painting soft golden streaks across Margaret's living room. She sat quietly with her coffee, replaying every word Andrew had shared the night before. His voice, trembling yet determined, still echoed in her mind. She could still feel the weight of his hand in hers, the warmth of his honesty, and the trust he had placed in her. Margaret wasn't the same after that night. Something inside her had shifted too. For years, she had thought her role as a mother was to shield Andrew from pain, to step in and fix everything. But now she realized her most important role wasn't to fix it, was to walk beside him, to listen, to love without conditions. Later that day, Andrew came by again. Margaret noticed immediately how his shoulders no longer carried the same heaviness. He smiled easier, and though his eyes still carried traces of doubt, there was also something new, their hope. "Morning, Mom," he greeted, slipping into the kitchen where she stood. "Morning, love," she replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. She placed it in his hands, just like she used to when he was younger and stayed up late studying. For a moment she saw the little boy he once was, and her heart ached with love. They sat across from each other at the table. Andrew fiddled with the handle of his mug before finally speaking. "I've been thinking about everything I said last night. It feels different now, like I'm not hiding anymore. But it also feels scary, because I know the world won't always be as kind as you are." Margaret leaned forward, her eyes steady on him. "You don't need the whole world to understand you, Andrew. You just need the right people, the ones who see your heart. And I promise I'll be one of them. Always." His throat tightened at her words. "I don't know if I can handle it, Mom." The judgment, the looks, the whispers. She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Yes, you can. You've already handled more than you realize. And you're not facing it alone anymore. We'll go through this together. Every step." Andrew exhaled slowly, as though he was letting go of some of the fear he had been holding. "I don't know how you do it. You make me feel like maybe everything will be okay." Margaret smiled faintly. "Because it will be. Life won't be perfect. There will be struggles. But real love always finds a way through." Silence settled between them for a moment, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with unspoken understanding, with a bond that had grown stronger in the space of one night. That afternoon, they decided to go for a walk. The autumn air was crisp, the trees dressed in shades of amber and red. Margaret tucked her arm through Andrew's, and together they strolled down the quiet street where he had once learned to ride his bike. "You know," Andrew said softly, watching the leaves crunch beneath their feet, "I used to think I'd have to carry my truth forever, just me and no one else. I thought telling you would break us. But now I realize it didn't break anything, it made us stronger." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes again. "That's because love doesn't break, Andrew. It bends, it stretches, it grows. But it doesn't break." They walked in silence for a while, passing familiar houses and neighbors waving hello. For Margaret, every step felt like a promise. A promise that no matter how uncertain the future might be, she would never let her son walk it alone. As they reached the park, Andrew slowed his pace. Children were playing on the swings, laughter filling the air. He watched them for a moment, a wistful smile tugging at his lips. "Do you remember when you used to bring me here every Saturday? How could I forget? Margaret laughed. You always insisted on climbing to the very top of the jungle gym, even when I told you not to. You'd look down at me and yell, "See, Mom, I'm brave." Andrew chuckled softly. Maybe I was braver than I thought, even back then. You always were, Margaret said, her voice gentle. You just needed to see it for yourself. They sat on a bench, watching the world move quietly around them. For the first time in a long while, Andrew looked at peace. He leaned back, eyes closed, letting the cool breeze wash over him. Last night, he said after a pause, when I told you everything, it felt like I was finally stepping into who I really am. I'll never forget the way you looked at me, not with disappointment, but with love. That moment changed me, Mom. Margaret swallowed hard, her heart swelling. It changed me too. It reminded me that love isn't about expectations, it's about acceptance. You gave me the chance to prove that, and I'll never forget it either. The sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the clouds with streaks of pink and orange. Margaret reached for Andrew's hand, squeezing it tightly. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. That's my promise to you. Andrew opened his eyes, turning to her with a small but steady smile. And my promise to you is that I won't hide anymore. I'll live honestly. And I'll carry your love with me no matter where I go. Tears blurred Margaret's vision, but they were tears of pride, not sorrow. She knew then that the bond between them was unbreakable. Stronger than fear. Stronger than judgment. Stronger than the silence that had once stood between them as they stood to leave. Andrew slipped his arm around her shoulders. They walked home together, the fading light wrapping them in its glow. The night before had been filled with fear and confession, but today was filled with hope and healing. Margaret knew that life would still have its challenges. There would be moments of doubt, of struggle, of misunderstanding, but she also knew something deeper. No matter how hard those moments became, love would always be their anchor dot. And as Andrew squeezed her hand one last time, whispering, "I'll never forget last night." "Mom," she smiled through her tears. "Neither will I, Andrew. Neither will I."